Hi, I'm Leslie Passante. I'm the web team lead at Fugue. We are building an operating system for the cloud. Check us out at fugue.co. My team at Fugue works on visual interfaces around our software product. So we recently built an application, a web application, to share with our beta testers so we could have them log into this application, download some software builds, see some documentation around this. Very simple use case. We decided to go with a serverless architecture. It looked very much like what you've already seen today. Our front end is a static front end sitting in S3, JavaScript. We designed a RESTful API based in API Gateway, which hits a Lambda function using DynamoDB on the back end. So we started off just doing this straight up in the Amazon console. Ran into a few problems. Our code base was very quickly getting unmaintainable. We had about 4 Lambda functions, so we were very quickly identified the need for some structure to our code. So we switched over to using the serverless framework. It was really awesome for our purposes. So today I'm going to talk about just quickly 4 things that we really found it was useful for. I think today has been really great because there's been so many good user stories, and I think that's the thing the community is lacking. When I started doing this, it was only 3 months ago, there was so little documentation. I was beating my head against the wall trying to figure out why this Lambda thing isn't working, how do I get API Gateway to do what I want it to do, and there was very little actual concrete information out there. So I'm going to quickly share 4 very concrete things that you can do if you're using API Gateway and Lambda. You might want to consider using the serverless framework for that. So, number 1, making API Gateway communicate with Lambda is hard. By default, API Gateway sends very little information about the incoming request through to the Lambda function that it triggers. And as a developer, you're probably going to want a lot of that information. You want to know what endpoint was called. You want to know some query parameters. If it's a post request, you want to know what the body of that was. And in order to pass that data through, you need to supply a request template for each and every endpoint in API Gateway. So that's a lot of copying and pasting. We found ourselves developing one request template that passed through all of the information that would probably be relevant, and we copied and pasted that into every single endpoint. The cool thing that the serverless framework allows you to do is create one centralized template for that and have each endpoint inherit it without doing that copy-paste business, and then you can override it on an endpoint-by-endpoint basis if you need to. So that really cleaned up our code in that respect. Number 2, Lambda functions are self-contained and can't share code. Well, duh, that's the cool thing about Lambda functions. We're deploying on a function-by-function level. It's a really nice way to keep your code small and maintainable. But if you're working on a project that has more than one Lambda function, you might find yourself wanting to share, say, a utils library in between those functions. And there's really no way to do that because you're deploying your code in a very containerized way. So the serverless framework allows you to include some files from a higher level in your deployment process. I should have said earlier, the serverless framework has the awesome ability to handle your deployments for you. So it will include, if you want, some files from a higher shared folder structure. So you can actually create like a utils folder that is referenced between multiple Lambda functions, and that code is bundled up as part of the deployment process. So that was really helpful for us, keeping some of our code centralized that needed to be centralized. Number 3, API Gateway and Lambda don't have environments. They have quasi-environments, and they implement them in different ways. API Gateway has the concept of stages, which is similar to environments in that the name of the stage is in the URL, and so you can point to specific stages of a single API and get different experiences. Lambda has versions and it has aliases, and it is automatically versioned every time you deploy code, and the alias you can change which version it's pointing to. So the serverless framework actually knits these together into a concept they call stages. It's very similar to environments. It allows you as a developer to have your local environment, to have your testing environment, to have QA, and to have a production environment that is not otherwise touched. So it actually creates this concept of environments in AWS, which doesn't necessarily have those by default. And lastly, and kind of biggest for me, Lambda functions don't support environmental variables. One of my Lambda functions hits an external API. I need an API key to access that. Where do I put that? I don't want to inline that API key in my Lambda code because my Lambda code gets committed to GitHub, and that's not a good secure practice. So serverless gets around this by creating, there's a JSON metadata file. It contains all your environmental variable data, the names and the values for those, and then as part of the deployment process, it inlines those in your code. So as far as Lambda knows, you had those in your code all along, but it at least gives you some separation. So my 5 minutes are up. I wrote a really long post on this just to try to contribute to the knowledge out there that's on our blog, blog.fugue.co. Check it out if you're interested in more of what we're doing. Thanks.